First, I'm going to talk about this great theological book, Cinderella. And this happens to be my daughter Lily's favorite story. She, from a very young age, wanted to read this book all the time, every night. She would read it. We would read it with her. And until several months ago, when she found out that there's a movie. She had no idea there was a movie. And so now she wants to watch the movie, and she calls it Singer. So she says, watch Singer, watch Singer. And she asks all the time to watch it. And I was thinking about that today because she was reading this book today, and I was like, that just really ties in with what I wanted to say, because we really, as humans, we really love fairy tales, and we really love the stories with the happy ending. And this story happens to be about a girl who's a slave to her family, and she gets rescued by the prince. And I believe that God has placed that in us, that desire to really love those stories, because he is the author of the greatest fairy tale ever written, and that fairy tale can be found in this book. And so my journey through the Bible is I first started reading the Bible several years ago, and I'd never read it like cover to cover, so I really just wanted to just do it. And I was actually going through a really hard time in my life. I was fighting infertility, and my husband and I went through that for like 4 years, and probably a year into it or so I started reading the Bible, and I didn't really have a lot of people to talk about it with, and so I just really I needed to hear from God. I needed to just get some hope from him. So he gave me several verses. One of them he gave me was Isaiah 40:31. It says, "But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint." That verse really helped me to wait on God, and I knew that whatever was going to happen was going to be in his timing. And then a couple years later, actually not very long before I got pregnant with Lily, I remember just being like so distraught over the years that I'd been lost, that we were trying to conceive. And I had a couple miscarriages, and the verse that God gave me for that was Joel 2:25, which says, "I will restore to you the years the locusts have eaten." That verse gave me so much hope, and I can say it, coming on the other side of it, that he has restored those years, because now I have 2 beautiful children, and I really, it seems like so long ago that happened, but it was 4 years of my life, but it really doesn't seem like that long at all compared to what I have now. And then when I finally did get pregnant, I was worried about miscarrying again. I had a lot of anxiety, and he gave me Isaiah 43:19, which says, "See, I'm doing a new thing. Do you not perceive it? I'm making a way in the desert and streams in the wasteland." And I clung onto that verse so tightly when I felt like my anxiety was coming back, and I did go on to have my healthy baby girl, Lily. And then actually a few months before Lily was born, Josh felt called to go into ministry, and we had no idea what that was going to look like. He was working at Hertz at the time, the car rental place, and he was making pretty good money, and but he actually ended up getting fired from Hertz like 3 days before Lily was born, and but God had already prepared us, and he had given us this verse, Isaiah 42:16, which says, "I will lead the blind by ways they have not known. Along unfamiliar paths I will guide them. I will turn the darkness into light before them and make the rough places smooth. These are the things I will do. I will not forsake them." And God was faithful to lead us and to make the path smooth for us and to make that happen. And Josh was able to go into full-time ministry. And anyway, so those were really great verses and everything. But as I've continued to read the Bible more, I've realized that it's not just verses that help us through rough times, like that is important, like verses to hold on to, but there's an overarching story of God's redemptive plan through Jesus that's all throughout the Bible. The Old Testament is literally promises that God has made to his people, Israel, and to us as his church. And then the New Testament is all of those promises being fulfilled in Jesus Christ. So when he says that those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength, he's talking about leaning on God and relying on him for our strength to get through whatever tough time we're going through. But he's also talking about leaning on the cross and relying on what Jesus did for our salvation alone. When he says, I will restore the years the locusts have eaten, he's talking about physical things or time that has been taken away from us. But he's also talking about eternity with him, when what sin and death have stolen from us will be restored forever. When he says, I will lead the blind by ways they have not known, he's talking about a promise he made to Israel to lead them back from captivity, to make the way smooth for them. But he was also talking about leading us who are blind to the cross and turning our darkness into light. When he says, see, I'm doing a new thing, do you not perceive it? I'm making a way in the desert and streams in the wasteland. He was making a promise to his people that he would one day rescue them. That rescue is in the form of Jesus, coming and doing a completely new thing, not abolishing the old covenant, but fulfilling it, as he says in Matthew 5:17. Do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets, which is all the Old Testament. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. With his life and death, he has fulfilled every promise God made to his people. So, like Cinderella, we were slaves. We were slaves to our sin. Our Prince, Jesus, rescued us from spiritual slavery and made us his bride. And one day everything on earth will be made new. And our Prince will come back for his bride, and we will live with him in heaven forever, happily ever after. So you see, those fairy tales are true after all. Jesus is our Prince, our knight in shining armor who came to rescue his bride, his church, by dying for us in our place and defeating sin and death. But where the Bible trumps every other fairy tale story is that Jesus came and died for us while we were still sinners. While we were enemies of God, he came and died for us. Nowhere in Cinderella does it say that she was an enemy of the prince. But that's what Jesus did for us. We were his enemies, and he came and died for us to save us and give us life. And one day we will reign and rule with him forever. And that's a pretty cool, happy ending. And it does sound too good to be true, because we've been conditioned to think that those fairy tales are not true, but it's real, and it's all in this book. You can read it for yourself. So, in wrapping up, I wrote down a few thoughts of why it's important to read the Bible. I would say it reminds us of God's faithfulness in the hard times. It keeps us grounded in truth so we can see Satan's deceptions for what they really are. It guides us. It's a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. Psalm 119, 105. But most of all, everything in it points to the redemptive story of the gospel. Everything, including the Old Testament, all points to Jesus. And that's something that we really need to be reminded of daily, because we forget that so easily. So, maybe you're asking, how do I make reading the Bible a reality? How do I do that consistently? I would say set yourself up for success. So start small, but be consistent. Try to do it daily. We're doing a Line Church group reading plan. So every week we're doing like about a chapter, and that's something you can just read that chapter every day of that week. really learn to love the Old Testament. That's something that was really difficult for me to read through, especially the first time, but like when you see it through the lens of everything in it points to Jesus, that these are promises that God was making to his people, that he was going to send someone to rescue us, then it really comes to life, and you can hold on to those. There's one-year Bibles that they go through a little bit of the Old Testament and New Testament and Psalms and Proverbs every day. That's something I actually do. I listen to a podcast that does that, and that's something you can just listen to in the car while you're doing dishes or whatever. It's something that you can, a daily thing that you can be consistent with doing. So all that to say, I'm not a great person at this. I'm not like standing up here and saying like I've got this all figured out, and I read my Bible every day, and I'm this great Christian or something. I will say that it's hard a lot of times, but that's where being consistent is really important, because even if you're consistent when you'll still do it even when it's hard. And then another thing I struggle with a lot is like just having like knowledge of the Bible, but not letting it transform my heart and my life. And we're not looking for just knowledge, we're looking for heart transformation. And, because Satan knows the Bible inside and out. Like, he knows it better than any of us. And he's not going to heaven. So, it doesn't, just reading the Bible doesn't mean that, you're saved, it's really, there's got to be a heart transformation. So it's almost like your heart is transformed first, and then you have a desire to read the Bible, and so I'm not trying to guilt anyone into reading the Bible, I'm just praying for all of us that our hearts will be transformed by what Jesus did for us on the cross, and that when we feel loved by him and that he delights in us, like, that's a hard pill to swallow sometimes, that he actually delights in us and doesn't make us feel guilty and all of that, and doesn't, like Joanne said, isn't stomping on us, and he actually loves us and delights in us. And so when we feel that from him, then we will have the desire to spend time with him, to be in the Word, and to want to commune with him.